Hi, my name is Hamid Homatash from Glasgow Caledonian University, and today I'm going to be talking about applied games challenges. First, I'm going to introduce a little bit about me. So I have over a decade's worth of experience of working in the games industry across a whole variety of companies. I've worked as an employee and a contractor for entertainment and commercial games, but also for teaching and simulation companies too. I've had a whole range of experience of creating entertainment products and these teaching products, and this spans across multiple platforms, such as mobile, which is iOS and Android, to web games, which is Facebook, HTML5, but also on PC, Mac, Nintendo Switch, and VR. I've also got 6+ years of teaching experience at Glasgow Caledonian University, teaching game development to students. So I've got a whole breadth of experience, and hopefully you'll get some insight into some of that as I talk about applied games challenges today. Just to show some of the games that I've worked on, so in this top left corner here, this is Subsurface Circular, a Nintendo Switch game that's very story orientated. We've got a bubble shooter here that was on the web. We've got a football management game, which was also on the web. We have Word Trick here, which was a word game on mobile. And this is Crafty Candy, which is a match-3 game, a first-person shooter that was on the web, and another mobile game that was inspired by Pokemon. Along with that, those entertainment games, we also have applied games. So this was a VR game for teaching wind turbine safety procedures to engineers. This was a game about pollination that was on the web. This was a game created for Channel 4 in the UK to promote women's body confidence. This is a current project that's ongoing called LifeLab Plus, which is a health game and lifestyle app for children. We have a drone simulation game here, and we have a game about climate change tipping points and negotiations that happen at COP events. So a whole range of experience there that I have, and I'm going to talk about some of these projects as we go on in this talk and say what some of the challenges were and some of the stuff that has been learned from these experiences. Before going any further in this talk, I would like to say what is an applied game. So I would like to give a definition to this. A definition that I have come across from IGI Global, which I really like, is a game designed for a primary purpose other than pure entertainment. I like this definition as it's indicative of entertainment is not the primary purpose. The primary purpose is an objective or a learning goal that you are wanting to achieve with your game, but that also engagement or entertainment is still a key part of that. People won't play your game unless it's exciting in some way or engaging in some way, so that still has to be a really strong purpose, but the main objective is to be able to give someone an experience or teach them something or make them learn about something new that they may not have before. You will also have heard applied games by other names, such as serious games, games for change, games with a purpose, extra games, or edutainment. They're all valid terminologies, and they may be interchangeably used as well. And applied games can employ two techniques mainly for actually their creation and what they're trying to do. So you'll probably have come across gamification. This is where you take an existing activity and you try to make it more game-like. Therefore, you try to engage people by making maybe not so fun experience a bit more fun and engaging so that people will want to engage with it. And hopefully you'll come across game-based learning too. This is where you will build a game from the ground up to tackle a particular challenge that you want to solve or you want someone to learn about. And usually game-based learning goes hand in hand with digital applied games. And for the purposes of this talk, everything will be around digital applied games. You can of course have applied games that are board games or non-traditional media, for instance. But for this talk, I'm going to specifically mention digital applied games whenever I'm meaning applied games. So with that terminology out of the way, why should we create applied games? Well, I think I've already touched on this a little bit, but the main reason is to engage people in new ways and increase engagement. There are lots of activities that people may need to learn or know about, and games are a fun and exciting medium to do that. Not everyone will want to pick up a training manual, for instance, and go through it page by page, especially if it's quite long and quite boring to read. But a game can teach these processes very quickly and efficiently, also in a fun, exciting, and engaging way. So this is why we really want to use applied games, is to make something really quite fun and intuitive and interactive, crucially. These things will help people to actually engage with the process, and hopefully the objective of what you're trying to teach or get them to experience will come across in a much more thought-provoking way, because they will be actively participating in the experience itself rather than just being a viewer or a reader and being in a passive experience. We also want to create applied games to deliver empathic experiences, and especially in situational context. So what I mean by this is you can put the player in the shoes of someone else to make them feel something that they wouldn't normally feel, for instance. That means they can emotionally connect with the content in a new way that you couldn't do just previously by watching a movie or reading, for instance. They get to experience that and make choices and decisions for themselves as they go through the process. And this means that they take on the persona of whoever you want them to do, or take on the persona of who you want them to become, sorry. And that's really, really important, because then you can have that empathy as a player about the context that you're in. Also, you can put people in, any context you want. So, there's research in health that for post-traumatic stress disorder, people have been put in events which frighten them or trigger PTSD. And by just starting very slowly and gradually working up, you can become desensitized to these situational contexts, for instance. And that means they can change their behavior. And that's a key thing that applied games try to do. We want to change a behavior or opinion about something. Not all applied games will be about learning and teaching, for instance. Some will be more thought-provoking to make you make a choice in the game about what is good, maybe what is bad, or maybe something that's a bit ambiguous about, what would I do in this context? Why did I do that? There's a lot more self-reflection that can happen while you're playing a game that maybe you don't necessarily think about at first, but as you go through the process and you've played the game and you think back on that experience, you can really have some really thought-provoking changes in behavior. And I've witnessed this myself through one of the games, which I'll show later, which was Earth Remembers, when climate change negotiators really had an impactful moment and really understood the importance of a mistake they made. And that kind of leads me nicely into this, and I genuinely feel this is the case, that applied games have the power to change the world, and I really mean that. The reason why I think that is, again, through that Earth Remembers game, these climate change negotiators, they tipped a climate change tipping point, which meant that the world was irreversibly changed forever, and there was an audible gasp in the room of the gravitas of that mistake that they made. So collectively, all these people in a room were just gasping, and it was such an emotional and impactful experience to everyone in that room. It really made a difference to them. And those are a few powerful people that had that experience, and hopefully that will then change the way in their behavior in their future negotiations with each other to be a bit more empathetic with each other and the planet. But also, it's not only for a few powerful people, like I said there, it's also for everyone. So if you can get an experience out to the whole world, and the whole world can experience that, and maybe change their opinion or behavior for the better and for the positivity of the world. So that's why I generally think applied games do have the power to change the world. Of course, there are challenges with this though. First, creating any game that is successful is a real challenge. I've worked in the games industry for over a decade, and creating entertainment-based games was really, really difficult. You had to know your target audience very well. The game had to be really designed very well. We were on a strict budget and time. They had to be shipped on accordingly. Tough decisions had to be made. They have to be marketed. And sometimes success also has a little bit of luck in it, getting to the market at the right time and for the right people. All of these make creating any game a real challenge. However, with applied digital games, that's even more challenging, I think. Not only do you have most of those same challenges as an entertainment-based game, but the game design in an applied game is very, very complex. You've got these kind of two opposing goals sometimes, which are to balance the fun and entertainment aspect with the learning outcomes that you want to achieve or the situation you want to put the player in. And sometimes that can feel like it's not like a game anymore, it's more like an instruction manual. And obviously that's a mistake. It's not balanced very well if it feels like that. But you've got that whole balancing issue to really comprehend. Along with the game design challenges, we have challenges about how to distribute it to our participants or the people who want to play the game. And we also have some challenges with trying to measure impact in these games. So these are the three main problematic challenges. That first being digital applied game design. So how do you design an experience that people want to play while making it purposeful to them? Distribution, getting the game to your target audience and to enough people. And thirdly, measuring impact. How successful is the game? How do you measure its success? Because of course, success for an applied digital game is very different from a commercial entertainment game. One is financial for commercial companies. For applied games, it's more about have you made a difference in the world and to the people that were playing your game. And what is quite problematic as a whole that goes over all of these elements is that there's little research that details these. Yes, there are topics in specific papers that cover little bits of all of these things, but the details when you read these papers are quite general, and therefore the specificity of some of the things that you might want to use in your own games is sometimes lacking in this information. And I found that developing my own applied games, where I've been trying to really go out and research these papers and try and take as much back into my own games. It's incredibly difficult to get the details for a practical manner, and this is one of the challenges that I will highlight. So moving on to that first challenge that I mentioned, so digital applied game design considerations. So these are some considerations that you should really think about when designing your game. First, you really need to have a clear idea of what the purpose of the game is. Now, I know that may seem a bit ridiculous to say, it's so obvious, but it's amazing that once you get into the design of the game and, when you're trying to balance that fun or engagement level with the teaching outcomes or the learning outcomes that you want to do, then actually the purpose of the game can become a bit muddied sometimes. So it's really good to start with any project with a clear purpose of what the game is meant to do. And that's a key thing for any applied game, is you need to have that purpose up front and very clear about what it is you want to expect the game to do. What is it meant to do to the player? What is it meant to do for their experiences? What is their learning outcomes by the end, or what is the type of behavior you want to change by the end? So have a clear purpose of what you want the game to do. During this purposeful time or trying to decide what the game's meant to do, you really want to identify the stakeholders in the project. And for most projects, these might be upfront. There will be people with specific domain knowledge that maybe you don't have the skill set for, but you are wanting to do something to teach something or change a behavior in something. So you will have some stakeholders, and you want to include them as early as possible in the design process. You will also have other stakeholders, your target audience, the people that are going to be playing your game. You really need to identify these as early as possible. And you also want to include them in the process, the game design process, as early as possible as well. Of course, the game is for them, so you should always be able to test with your actual target audience as you go through the whole process. But the key thing I want to say about the stakeholders is that by including them as early in the process as possible and having regular contact with them throughout the whole game design journey of the game, it means that any ideas that aren't suitable are recognized very early, and any ideas that are quite strong really come to the forefront of the game design. And really, that means you can know that you are on the right path to designing your applied game. As I mentioned, you really need to decide on who the target audience is, but also what platform is best for them. So when I mean platform, I mean what device are your players going to be playing the game on? Is it going to be a web game, a mobile game? Is it going to be on PC or Mac? Do you need any specialist hardware, like a VR headset, for instance? So you need to really understand your target audience. Do your target audience have those platforms? What do they use on a day-to-day basis? Or, will they have access to advanced hardware, for instance? And the real main message, as with any game, not just applied games, you want to iterate and test as much as possible. And the reason why you want to do this, especially for digital applied games, is to confirm if the learning outcomes have been met and that the game is engaging or fun or exciting. I think that's a real thing to consider, is that you want to be testing throughout the whole process. Your digital game design will evolve all the way through that process, and it should evolve. If you are in a situation where your game design is a locked brief and it doesn't deviate from what you have designed, then I think you are designing your game wrong, because when you come to playtest with people, you will see that you will need to make changes. Some things will be great. You know, people will understand the game and the purpose, and they will get the messaging from the game. There will also be other parts where that doesn't come across, and therefore the game design must change to make it a better experience. So these are definitely things that you really need to consider when designing an applied game. There are issues with obviously designing digital applied games. And the one that I really want to highlight is that there's plenty of information on the principles and pedagogy of applied games and gamification as a whole, but few focus on digital applied games specifically. So there are many journals and papers that go into quite a lot of detail about the gamification process as a whole, you know, what learners are expected to do and certain activities you can use to apply gamification in the classroom, for instance. You know, there's lots of articles on things like that. But when you're looking for digital products or digital applied games, specifically in these research papers, there's actually not as many papers as you would think. And that's a real problem. There's a real lack of information there. And that is, you know, a massive problem when you're trying to create an applied digital game. Obviously, you want to use the latest up-to-date research. And although there are papers that do detail these things, there's not many of them. And the few articles that there are, you know, that specifically mention games and the way they were designed, the way they were, you know, there's usually kind of a lack of the specificity of how they actually did that, how they actually solved the challenge. In a lot of these papers, they will say, oh, the challenge was solved, and we did X, Y, or Z. But they don't really state how they did X, Y, or Z. You know, why did they choose this particular type of game mechanic to use in this scenario for this problem that they were trying to solve? This specificity is kind of missing in a lot of the papers. And this is kind of practical information that I would love to see more of, because that's the kind of information as a person that creates applied games really wants to use. I want to know why a particular game mechanic is useful in this particular context or scenario, so that if I ever come across a similar context or scenario, I might want to be able to go, oh, they did this in their game, that's their results, they did it in this reason. I'm going to tweak a few things to make it fit into my context, but that's a really great article and I'm going to use that. That sort of information at the moment is really just missing, I feel. There's not many articles or research papers or even talks that actually go into that amount of detail. So I think that's a real issue we have with general digital applied game design at the moment in our field. And I think what would really help with that is having more retrospective papers and talks. Now, this is something that the games industry itself does really well, actually. They hold a lot of events, a lot of conferences all around the world, and they do breakdowns of games and how they created them, and retrospectives of what worked and what didn't work. And they have a whole vast amount of resources on this stuff. With digital applied games specifically, there's very few conferences, there's not many journal papers as I've just described. So I think we really need to catch up with that. Obviously, there are certain conferences like the European Conference on Game-Based Learning, for instance. You know, that's a great conference, but it only happens once a year. It's, you know, not as big as event as lots of the industry-based games events. So, and therefore, there's not as many people know about it or, you know, go to it, for instance. So I think really as academics, we really need to catch up on that. And we also need to be writing more papers about retrospectives and that kind of thing going forward. Moving on to distribution considerations. So when you're trying to distribute your game, obviously choosing the right platform is very important, which is I've previously mentioned. So typically you'll be wanting to use either mobile or the web for most of your games. The reason being is these are ubiquitous. Most people have access to this, so it makes sense to have your platform be something that's easily accessible by anyone. And you really want to ensure that you have your hardware requirements as low as possible. So even though you might be choosing mobile or the web, you'd be wanting to choose devices that are not the most recent devices, for instance. So you don't want to be choosing the latest Android or iOS phone or Apple phone, for instance. You want to be choosing maybe devices within the last 5 years. I think that's the general kind of acceptable level. People do hang on to their devices for a little while, and if you want to reach as many people as possible, then about 5 years is about acceptable. You definitely don't want to be doing something like this, which is one of our projects that we did at university. This is our wind turbine safety game. Obviously, this was okay though, this was for engineers and we could give VR hardware to the engineers as they were training, so it wasn't too much of a problem. But if you're trying to mass distribute this to lots of people. Obviously, having a big gaming PC, first of all, is probably a big no-no, and the VR headsets themselves are quite expensive. So not many people have them. So make sure that you have your hardware requirements as low as you can. We also have problems with discoverability. So this is a picture of the Android App Store with their free games, their top free games at the moment. And you are going to release your game on, say, the mobile or the web, then you need your game to be discoverable. You need people to be able to search it and find it. And this is where search engine optimization or app store optimization techniques come into play. So this is really about how do you design your keywords to get as many people as possible coming to your game organically. And how do you create your screenshots, your app icons, if you have them, so that they are enticing and that people will want to play your game. So discoverability in these app stores and just the general web itself are really, really important if you want to reach a lot of people. Obviously, that is a key point. Lots of applied games don't need to reach a lot of people. Maybe you already have your target audience and your participants who are going to take part in your project. That's great. But if you are not in that lucky scenario that you know everything and you have contact with people, then you do need to be aware of discoverability and what you may need to do to get as many people into your game as possible, because of course you want to make whatever findings you come across in your game as reliable and as accurate as possibly can. And that same thing goes to marketing to your target audience as well. Obviously, we have adverts that you can use to do some marketing with. Putting adverts on Facebook or other social media platforms is generally cheap, but you do need a little bit of a budget to do that. So, you might need to have your project take into consideration that you are going to use a little bit of money to get some people into your game so you can get some people playing it and get reliable data. And you can also have social media, which is the free equivalent. So if you've got good connections with people, or you go for an influencer that has a lot of connections, and you get them to promote your game for you, then you can reach a large, wide audience, and get that reliable data. Hopefully, you will target an influencer or your networks, which would be for the target audience. So the people that would want to play your game rather than just the general public. So if you have like a specific like age range, for instance, of people that want to play this game, you would get influencers that are good for that age range or that ethnicity or that gender or whatever other metrics you might want, if they're working in a specific profession, for instance. So be aware that you can actually reach a large amount of people using social media and adverts if you have the budget for adverts. So I want to come back to some of those applied games that I showed earlier. And I just want to talk through some of the difficulties that I've noticed when working on these projects. So first one is this VR simulation game, which was about wind turbine emergency safety procedures. Quite a mouthful to say. And I already mentioned that it required a big gaming PC. The hardware is VR. Not many people have this. This was acceptable in the project that we were using it in because we were given the VR hardware to engineers that would be trialing it. And so they would go in and, put on the headset and that would be fine. In the real world for them, their real life training would only happen every couple of years. So, every 2 or 3 years, they would go to an actual location and practice the emergency procedures. The whole point of this project was to get them to do that more often, maybe even on a monthly basis, and therefore VR and this hardware was quite easy to get it to them. They could do their training and then it could be passed on to someone else. So that was perfectly fine. We knew our target audience. We had no real distribution challenges, even if the platform requirements were quite high and the hardware requirements were quite high. This game, Earth Remembers, was a very complicated game. And on this game, it was a case of there were up to 30 people playing this over a network connection, and every 3 people would be on one computer, which meant that we had a total of 11 computers, including the host information screen, that all had to be set up in that same venue at the same time, and this was on PC and Mac. Now, this was a real headache and challenge for distributing. It worked well for the context that we were demonstrating at COP23 and COP24, but we then wanted to take this further. We wanted to make it easy to distribute, to have other people play this and give us more data and feedback, because obviously our data we were getting back was from climate change negotiators. There's only a few of them. The COP events only run every 6 months or every year, and we couldn't get a lot of data out of that. We got very impactful data, from quite a few people high up in government places and NGOs, but in terms of trying to have a big outreach, we kind of didn't do a very good job on that. And that was primarily because we chose the wrong platform. We've now since made this a web-based game, and therefore it's a bit easier to set up. But just the way the game was designed, with having all those networked connections, is still quite a challenge even today. So right now it's only really getting used in the classrooms now and to great effect, but it would have been nice to have distributed it to a wider audience. It would be nice for anyone to come along and play this game. So just the the design of having 30 people all connected at the same time is a real challenge, along with all the other hardware requirements. And since then, we've learned from this. These 2 games up here are pure web games that can be played in any browser. And this was really great. We could reach a wide audience. Yeah, this might be quite a niche game, as this was a drone game that was trying to promote the usage of drones on construction sites. But we had a lot more people be able to test this game than we would have if we had have aimed for specific hardware like we had done in the past with these. And the same goes for this game about pollination concepts that was teaching school children. This has been played by over 10,000 children worldwide. And, that's an amazing achievement, and the numbers are still going up. So, it was very easy to access for them. So this is why I'm really making the point about platforms. And this particular thing is in a learning platform called Legends of Learning. So discoverability was quite easy too. Educators look for games that they want to include in their curriculum and in their classrooms, and they can pick and choose. And obviously this is a game they can choose. Moving on to mobile games here. So this is a current project that I'm working on called Life Lab Plus. It's a health game for high school children. And it's a collection of mini games and activities. So these are different screenshots from the mini games themselves. And we've launched this on the App Store, on both App Stores, Android and iOS. And anyone in the public can download this. For our special testing group, we have a special logging process for them so that we can get super detailed information and metrics from them. And this is working a real treat. We've been able to make design decisions on the game on the fly using these real-time metrics. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the next slide. So, coming on to measuring an impact, whatever project you create, you want to be able to measure the impact that you're having on that project. So one cool way and new way of doing that is to use analytics in your applied digital games. We have a digital game, and most of these products are connected to the web, so why not get some actual real-time metrics from your game whenever you want? And like I said in that LifeLab Plus app, we are collecting real-time analytics, and we've made changes to the game in real time based on these metrics. Now, that's great for game design, but it's also fantastic for data collection purposes because it means that we are able to collect data in real time and specific data of what we want. And we've got all this quantitative data that we can make our impact assessments on. Are people engaging with a specific part of the app? Do they enjoy this? How long do they spend in that part of the app? How far do they get in a particular mini game? Do they complete all the levels? Do they drop off halfway through? In that app, they have recipe cards. Have they looked at the recipes? So these are all types of things that we can gain an insight to. And I think going forward, I think this is something that is super powerful for digital applied games. So here's a few services that can be used. You've got Unity, you've got Firebase, so you've got Game Analytics, you've got all these companies and plugins and stuff that you can just put some analytics into your game and you can collect them and therefore be able to graph these things out visually as well, which is very, very useful. And therefore you can measure impact in real time as people are playing your games, but also at the end of the process because you've got all this database of metrics that you can fall back onto. But if you do go for the App Store approach and you release an app on the App Store, then you've also got some qualitative data as well. So, we can use the App Store reviews of what people are saying about what they liked about the product or what they didn't like. Obviously, this is not totally academic in terms of, what people might say. But again, it's about getting an insight and being able to have some qualitative way to measure the impact of your game. And it's a very, very strong way of doing that. Because obviously, customers, if especially if they're not in your target audience or your target participant group, for instance, they will just say whatever's on their mind, which is great for being able to make changes or to see if it's having a really good impact. We also have focus groups, interviews, questionnaires. Obviously, these are standard practice in academia. These are still ways that you're going to measure your impact. If you're using target hardware that is quite specific and niche, like the VR experience that we did earlier, then interviews are obviously a great way to get as much information as possible from each participant. If you've got more people, then a niche audience, for instance, and focus groups are really good. And obviously you've got questionnaires too. One interesting thing about questionnaires is that obviously these digital products, you can embed a digital questionnaire into your product to get information that way. That's really useful as well because the more fresh that someone is doing the questionnaire from the experience they've just had, the better the reliability of the data you're going to get because it's they've just done that experience, it's in their memory. Of course, we as academics always measure impact by conferences, papers and journals, and as I was mentioning earlier, it would be nice to have more of these. So please do have more papers, more conferences and journals. Hopefully that's a great way of measuring impact, and obviously we can get impact scores and how many people reference in certain papers and so on. And just more generally, there's lots of new stories that can be generated, and this is something that you need to promote yourself and push to media outlets to get bigger outreach. We've had quite a few news stories about the applied games that we have done at Glasgow Caledonian University. You can probably search for most of these games and you'll find some sort of news article or site that goes over these games and the impact that they've actually had, and that's a really, really great way of promoting general confidence across everyone. And these are some of the games and some of the impacts that we've had. So I've mentioned the Earth Remembers once, I won't go over that, but these climate change negotiators had audible gasps at some things that went on of these climate change tipping points that passed. And they then decided to change their policies and try and invest more money into climate change mitigation and adaptation, for instance, in this simulated game and experience. So hopefully that's actually had an impact in the real world. And we know that from news stories and from interviews that we did with the actual participants, they did really generally have impactful moments in the game. This drone simulation game has also had quite a strong impact. There's been a conference paper and journal paper since published about this, and you can read that on the web. And this Life Lab Plus game that I've mentioned before is really quite impactful too. With this real-time data, we're seeing that a lot of people are using various parts of the app, and therefore we know it's actually having a positive impact on some children's lives. Looking to the future, obviously there's a lot of things that I've covered quite quickly there, but the future improvements that I would love to see are some of the following. I would love to see more retrospective post-mortem style write-ups on digital applied games. Again, this is something the games industry does really, really well, and I want to see more of that come through in the academic world and specifically on these digital applied games. I'd love to see more events, more conferences about these applied games and how people have tackled the game design challenges in them, why they did it that way, how they did it that way. And, being able to then use some of that material and take it into your own game is really, really strong. And I think that is something we need to do more of. We also need better guides on how to market and distribute applied games to reach wider audiences. Now, the reason why we really want to reach a wider audience is so that more people can become exposed to applied games, more people that become exposed to them, obviously more knowledge will be shared, generally speaking, but it comes back to that change of behavior. We have the power to change the world with these impactful emotional experiences that we can create. So why not try and promote that to as wide as an audience as possible? The more people we can hit, even just the general public, then the better the possibility of changing the behaviors and the mindsets of people becomes. And that's why I think we really need better guides of how to market and distribute applied games. It is slightly different. Obviously, most of these games will be free, for instance, and we are not going for pure entertainment reasons. So how they are marketed needs to be slightly different to cater for that. And finally, I want to leave you with a big, big idea. I really see an opportunity to create an applied games distribution service for easy discoverability. Imagine Epic's Game Store or Steam's Steam Store for applied games, for instance, where anyone could search the marketplace for an applied game and be able to see the blurb about it, what was the purpose of why it was created, why it was created, how it was created, screenshots of it, video demo of it, links to papers or other material that are related to that project. I think that would be an amazing opportunity to be able to create an enhanced community, to share best practices, give these retrospectives, promote data and information sharing. So, if people found that lots of people interacted with a particular portion of an app, how many people was it? What's the data for that? Would a similar app be expected to have similar results? All of this stuff would be a huge opportunity, I would say, to, create something new, something exciting, something that is easy to find and easy to use, and that even the general public have access to, not just for academics. So I'm just going to leave you with that big idea at the moment. I would love if anyone wants to talk about something like that to come and message me. My email was on the first slide, which is hamid.homatash@gcu.ac.uk. So, if you want to chat about something like that, that would be amazing. And I just would love to see a network around applied digital games that go into a lot of details about them. So I hope you've enjoyed this quick talk, or rather, lots of topics that have been covered quite briefly, and I'm always open to chatting much more in depth with any of the things that I've mentioned. So thank you for listening to me today. Hope you've enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll chat soon. Bye bye.